Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
And I'm Mark Tucker, and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Good to see you again, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. How are you doing?
I've been having a rough week, but always good to chat with you.
Yeah,
As we've talked about many times, just chatting about what's going on makes my day brighter, makes my week brighter. So
yeah. Sometimes, there's up days and there's down days on the tech side of things. Uh,
yeah,
Sometimes it's a day of successes, and some days it's a time where the problem that you end the day with is the same problem you started the day with.
yeah, or the problem you end the day with, and three others is the problem that you started the day with. So yeah.
Yeah. No, but
But
it's kind of interesting because just chatting with different people on social media. It's fun to see what people are saying, and there was a comment just recently about just kind of a little blurb like, hey, I finished something that I've been working on for a couple of months, and I think it's important to take a moment and celebrate your successes. Even write them down, because there's going to be days where it's challenging. There's a lot of problems to be solved and new things to learn, and tech can be challenging.
yeah, and it's really funny is sometimes you never really know where those challenges come from. There have certainly been times when I've looked at a problem in the morning and said, I don't know how I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And by lunch it's done. And other days when I'm planning on, well, this should be straightforward, and 2 days later I'm going, I don't know where I ended up.
Yeah.
So you're right, it happens with tech, and that's just where it goes sometimes.
And so if you're getting started, or just a few years under your belt, don't feel like it's going to go away. Not to be pessimistic. It's just it's
Well,
it's part of the gig.
It's
And
part
we
of the
have
gig.
challenges too.
It's part of the gig. It's how things go. I was just thinking we had another subject that we were thinking about talking about. Why don't we put that one off till next week, and let's talk about some failures that we've had in tech a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, I think both of us have talked about these sorts of things on and off in the past, but I think that's something that especially developers who are just starting out, may get frustrated and not realize that no, this is a lot more common than you think.
Yeah. It happens throughout your career. There's days where you're like, okay, I'm sure I'm getting fired over this thing.
I've
And
had many days like that. Yes.
I was doing so I live in Arizona, but didn't always live in Arizona. So it was a brand new consulting job that I had. First week at the client that I was working at, probably at that time I had 3 years under my belt as a professional software developer, and I went to do something and I ended up deleting the Access database.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
I was sure, I'm like, well, that's it. But I got the courage up and I went over and said, you know what, I think I actually just deleted this database. It's like, oh, no problem, happens all the time. Here, let me restore it for
you. I know exactly that feeling. And that's one of the great, that's the sign of a good boss, I think, is
Yeah.
making sure that, they've got things in place. So then when you do make mistakes like that, there's coverage. I've talked about before how I do a lot of system administration, a lot of operations stuff. And there have certainly been times when I've, done something and pushed out a change and suddenly go to my boss, I think that change that I just pushed out just broke everything. What do I do? And in fact, I think I pushed it out in a way that I'm not sure how to roll back. And he's like, well, okay, here are a couple of options. Let's explore how to roll it back, and this is one of the things I think is most important. The last thing you should do, the thing you should almost never do in cases like that, is panic.
Yeah.
One of the real lessons, whether that's, you introduced a bug that's now crashing everything, whether you've made, pushed an accidental release, deleted a database, whatever. It's hard to do, but panicking is almost certainly not going to fix it.
And there are things that you can do while you're in panic mode that could make this situation worse.
A lot worse.
So, take a pause, step back, try to figure out what you did, and then get somebody else involved so that you guys can walk through and talk about the situation and figure out what to do about it.
Right, absolutely. And even where possible, get people involved to say, look, my boss and I are going to be working on this. Can you go email everyone to say, there's a problem and we know and we're working on it, so that I don't have to field email while I'm also trying to fix the problem?
Yeah.
So that, this is definitely a time when pulling in a team of people to help you, really, really crucial.
I totally agree on that. And you don't have to feel like you're supposed to, feel like you're part of a team. Hopefully you are. Hopefully you're in a situation that you were hired on, and you feel like you're a part of the team, and those relationships are made early, so that you can feel that way. But developers make mistakes.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if you're just starting out or if you've been doing it for 20 years. There's still mistakes that you make, and it's okay. There could be really critical mistakes, but usually, at least in my experience, it's something that can be recovered from. And I've never had a situation where I've been fired for a mistake.
I never have either. I think one of the things I was thinking about, how as developers, we sometimes make mistakes. We often talk about coding practices,
Mhm.
and best practices. And one of the things I think to realize is that best practices are there because somebody made a mistake once.
Yeah.
And these are the practices that we learned over time, help prevent making mistakes. So for example, if you're working on databases, it's really, really common sometimes to say, oh, I'll build a string that represents my query and send that string with the query off to the database. And, as developers over time, we've learned that's not a very good idea.
Mhm.
There's some serious security problems involved in that. And over time, we've learned not to do that, and how to make things so that instead of us building this string by hand, we have tools and libraries that build the query for us in a safe way. So it checks for illegal quotes, illegal escape characters,
Yep.
other things that, if somebody's sending, these characters along, could break the query or delete your database or do other things. So relying on libraries that we've made, or that, are generally trusted in the industry, are a really good way to make sure we avoid some of those serious pitfalls that can really come and bite us.
Yeah. Well, and over time we've have things like unit tests or code reviews. There's a number of things, coding standards. There's just different things that kind of becomes this core group that most organizations that are medium size or above usually try to follow. But sometimes, going from company to company over the years and years that I've been doing this, that I've noticed that there's other things that you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I haven't really seen this. This is kind of a new one. And then you ask, like, how come, what's behind this thing? And then you hear the story about, oh, so-and-so was,
Right.
Doing this, or I was, doing this thing and this happened. And,
Yep. I think another one of those best practices is, and we're going to talk about how to deal with client and server stuff, but this is something that does directly apply to voice, is that we have this assumption that the values that we're going to get are always clean values, or that there'll always be values from a known list. And every so often we get unexpected input. So it really means that when we're building our server processes, we can't really trust what the client is going to be sending us. We could always say, oh yeah, I'm just going to be getting red, green, and blue. Well, what happens if I don't send a string? What happens if I send a null or a number or another structure? It's important for us to be checking for valid values, because otherwise we start messing things up in our database, in our processing. And fortunately, again, more and more our languages and our libraries are helping us handle that directly.
Yeah.
But it's still really common for us to just kind of make assumptions about what the input is and not validate that input.
Yeah. So having a good validator library or some good validation functions, check, see if it's required, see if the number's within a certain range, that it's even a number,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
No, numbers inside a certain range is a really good common one. Another, good issue is if you're dealing with things like prices. It's easy to think of, $2.99 and to say, well, that's a floating point number, right? Well, no, it's not a floating point number. And if you try to represent it as one, you start getting nice rounding errors somewhere eventually.
Yeah.
So certainly if you're dealing with currencies, understand why we don't use floating point numbers for currencies. And again, this is something that easily could come up in a voice action where you think what the input is going to be.
Yeah. I guess another thing that I want to bring up is the fact that you don't have to know it all. What I'm doing today is nothing like I learned at school. It wasn't the same language as I learned at school. It wasn't the same thing that I was doing when I first started. The required programming language that I had in school was COBOL because I went through the business program. I did also take a Pascal class and a C++ class, but I don't do any of those. First job out of college was doing some sort of a database, a SQL database builder, form builder over top of database tables. It was like what they used to call them 4GLs or fourth generation language tools. I don't do any of that anymore. But a lot of the same concepts apply about keeping data and validating things, but don't worry that you don't know something, because it's common. This is this field is something, for the most part, that it's going to be a lifelong learning journey for you.
Yeah.
And it's going to be you thinking through, analyzing a problem, figuring out solutions, talking to other coworkers, bouncing ideas off them, looking things up in documentation.
And I think those 2 points are some of the most important ones. Is for anything, feel free to talk to coworkers as you're doing the technical design. Feel free to talk to other programmers who have been doing this for longer. Learn how to read the manuals, because they're not always obvious.
No, they're not.
So learn how to read them. Learn where are the trusted resources that you can turn to when you have questions. Places like Stack Overflow or forums. So yeah. But definitely you're not in this alone.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the things I really like about being a programmer, is that I do get to keep learning things.
Yeah.
5-6 years ago, I didn't know anything about voice development, but it interested me enough to get started, and I liked it, and I kept going, and I kept learning, and I keep getting put in new situations where
we're still learning. New. I mean, every time there's a new problem to tackle with voice and figure out how to solve it.
Yeah, I haven't developed every single feature that's available to develop for Alexa or Google Assistant. And I'm being thrown into situations where now we're doing custom assistants where it's neither of those two. And I'm like, okay, so what am I going to use for my ASR or my NLU or my NLP? Is it going to be mobile? Is it going to be web? Is it going to be custom hardware? You're just like, whoa, there's just so much out there.
Yeah.
But it's okay. But sometimes it does. Sometimes it's hard and it's heavy and you're kind of feeling discouraged. And that's okay. Hopefully, taking a break. Sometimes I, have a problem and I work really, really hard. I'm like, I'm going to get this solved by the end of the day, and it turns out I don't. And I wake up the next day and I have an idea of something else, or even just kind of an inkling of someplace else to look or a different way to approach it. And I start going and I'm like, hey, these pieces are falling into place. Pretty cool.
No, definitely. One of the things I think it's important to learn as you're making mistakes is when you catch yourself making those mistakes, take the break.
Yep.
Step away. If it's non-time critical, really step away from it and come back to it when you're feeling more fresh.
Yeah. Go on a walk, grab something to eat.
Call it a day if you can call it a day. Really don't pushing yourself to solve a problem. Again, has a good chance that it's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, if you're in a situation where you're pushing yourself, it's important and it's critical. But if you've done 3 10-hour days in a row trying to solve this problem, then clock out a little bit early. You need a rest. Just make sure you get a good night's sleep.
I'll say it. You asked how I was doing earlier, and I said, and it's because I've spent all day trying to figure out a bug, turning to the documentation, turning to Stack Overflow, trying one thing out after another. And, shortly before we came on, I said, you know what? It needs to sit overnight. I'm not going to solve this problem tonight. So I'm taking the step away from it and return to it with, hopefully some good sleep tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to recognize as developers that that's okay.
Yeah, you do need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure there is time to push yourself and get something done if it's critical, but don't consistently sacrifice yourself for the project because that's not sustainable. And
well, you can look at it 2 ways. One is that it's not sustainable. It will start affecting you.
Yeah.
And hopefully your boss is backing you on this, because they care about you, but also because they care about the quality of what's being developed.
Yeah.
If you've turned something out and you are fried to a crisp, it's a pretty good chance your code is not going to be as good as it should be.
Yeah.
Or as it could be if you gave yourself some rest. And I can't tell you the number of times when I have pushed myself and had to return back to the code later and said, I honestly don't know what this was doing, but it's obviously not working.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can do is rip it out and start over.
Yeah. And hopefully you're in a place where you feel like you've formed relationships and it's been clear from your manager, your team lead or coworker that you can speak up and you can just say, hey, need a second set of eyes on this, or I just need to take a little break from this, or this is the situation. This is beginning of day 2 that I'm hitting this problem, and I don't have a solution. What would you suggest on how I approach it? It's extra hard and sometimes even dangerous if you just think that you've got to do it all on your own.
Yes.
Now there might be situations where it's a small shop and you're it, but you need to then try to form a network of people, former coworkers or other things that you can chat with things about.
And I think as we say frequently, we hope that we're that kind of resource, especially when it comes to voice development.
Yeah.
Turn to us. I've had plenty of people ask me, little one-off questions, and then plenty of people turn to me and say, this is a bigger problem. Can we hire you as a consultant? And, there are people out there that are willing to do both of those things, help on small things and help on bigger things.
Yeah.
But certainly build your network inside and outside your company if need be.
Yeah. So just kind of as we close out, I just want to circle back to kind of how we started this conversation was about the tweet about celebrating when you've accomplished something. If you need to write it down, go back and review it. It's nice to keep a little log of your successes, because there's going to be some days that you're kind of like, I don't even know what I'm doing. That you can go back and look at the list and kind of like think about, oh yeah, I did this, and it's just make sure that you celebrate your successes and don't just beat yourself up from the challenges that you're having.
Definitely. And even if all you're posting is had a good day. Even if you're totally vague about what it was, celebrate it, because you'll find other people will be there to celebrate it with you.
Yeah. I try to do that whenever I see that. I'm like, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but cool. I'm glad. Go for it. Because
Yep.
I'm right there with you.
Again, the summary is we make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Learn how to, make sure you learn from them and make sure you celebrate when you have those successes.
And we'll hope that, go ahead and share them with us too. Here on Two Voice Devs, we would be happy to celebrate those things with you.
We're always happy. Reach out to us on Twitter, comments below, LinkedIn, and we hope you'll join us next time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, everybody.
Take care, Mark. Have a good week.
Yeah. Good luck on your challenge tomorrow.
Thank you.